Hello and welcome to another edition of Spotlight. I'm your host, Tanika Douglas. My guest today's name is synonymous with politics. He has served as senior lecturer in the Department of Economics at the University of the West Indies. He has significant academic and financial experience. He has also served as Director General for the Planning Institute of Jamaica. He has also had the official title of Minister of Finance from 1993 to 2007. By this time, you should know that my guest is Dr. Omar Davis. Dr. Davis, welcome to Spotlight.
Thanks very much for having me.
Now, Dr. Davis, take us through your formative years. Where were you born?
I was born in a village called Four Parts. It's 3 miles west of Maypen. I like to think of it as the center of Jamaica. And I was born and grew up there. Went to Four Parts primary school. And from there to Glenmuir. I went to Glenmuir 3 months after it was started.
Okay.
And so I'm a Clarendon person, because I then left Glenmuir after GCA levels. Okay. And went to UWI. And then I went back and taught at Glenmuir for a year. Very proud of my Glenmuir heritage as the first university graduate.
Okay.
And so that's, in a sense, almost total rural background.
Rural background.
Yes.
Now, what was life like growing up in Clarendon?
My time, it was really clearly not as developed as present. When I went to Glenmuir, I was one of 2 persons from Four Parts Primary.
Okay.
To, as we call it, get scholarship. Okay. You know, now every person who does GSAT is going to be placed. In our time, only there were so few places in the high schools. There were only two of us who went there, and so it was significantly different from that perspective. It was much more restrictive. But I did all the things which a young person growing up would do. You know, play all the games, mainly cricket. Football was not as popular then as it is now. But everything, you had to do lots of chores around the house, and many of the things people take for granted. I recall when electricity services came. I recall when running water came. Okay. So there have been such significant changes over that period.
What was your family setting like?
Very stable. Very stable. My parents, there were 6 of us.
Okay.
Some have, you know, nationally recognized names. Like one brother is the cabinet secretary, Carlton. One was the former president of University of Technology, Ray. And so, so they're very, very stable. I was 5th. Okay. There are 2 boys, 2 girls. Then I came along. Then my younger sister. So. Got all the negatives and positives about being a younger brother. Positives that you had big brothers and sisters to emulate. Negatives in that they would, you know, administer punishment and all that. But in a sense, there was always a stability. Although my father was the only person who worked out the things they considered essential, like books, etc., we always had. So I grew up in that sort of environment. So
education was
always
a priority.
Yes. But also the villages were different then. So I have one biological mother, but there are like 6 different persons who saw me as their son, and there are persons still alive. For example, my Sunday school teacher, Miss Webley. I mean, they sort of owned me. Then there are other persons. There's Mrs. Hannah Lawson, who still is alive, but who I have to report into, and whenever I go down. There are so many different persons, and there are male figures too. One interesting person is O.D. Ramtali, who I've known virtually all my life. He was working at the Farmers Cooperative, and so you always felt secure, not that you're tied in, but you had to behave yourself, because anybody could administer punishment if they saw you doing something on the road. Yeah.
So how important was that for you and your upbringing?
Very important. I had a sense of security. I have what sometimes has been seen as arrogance I've always been made to feel very secure. There have been always persons who have been there for me, and it continued into high school. There are teachers, my principal, Sydney Scott, Barbara Smith, Karen Smith's mother.
Okay.
She taught me. She remains my friend. Mrs. Brown, who was the vice principal, she's retired, living in Mandeville. But let me make a confession. Like if I'm giving a speech and Mrs. Brown is in the audience, I get nervous because I think she's grading me.
Okay.
Right? And she laughs when I tell her that, but it's true. But she was always the bond is still there. She's still there. She's still a very important influence. So there are a whole set of persons who, and I try to keep in contact, not as much as I would like to, but Glenmuir remains very important to me. Clement Ratcliffe, the principal, is like my younger brother. He came to Glenmuir 2 years after me, but man, his life is already been in Glenmuir, but Clement doesn't make a move without calling me, and so that whole, there's a closely knit set of persons. And several have become prominent nationally. Like Guy Scott, the plastic surgeon, is a Glenmuir boy. Patrick Borising, the chief surgeon at KPH. Neil McGill, the former MP. There are a whole set of persons who, because I went first, these are like my younger brothers.
So what sort of values did your parents instill in you?
Good old time values, honesty, work hard. They had a faith in education because they didn't have it. My parents left primary school at 13 or so, but they felt that arming their children with education would make them independent. Right, open doors, and they also instilled in us the notion that we had benefited from the country. And so it's not by chance that we have all gone into public service in one form or the other.
Okay.
Yeah.
Different values from what we have today?
I don't want to become that sort of old man who all keeps thinking that things were better. But I'm sort of worried about the me alone attitude of many persons, in the sense that I hear parents complaining about what governments don't do for their children. My parents, as I said, only my father was working as a mechanic at Monuments, but you didn't expect, you bought your own books, your uniform, whatever. So I think, for whatever reason, there's a greater sense of dependency now, that somebody else is responsible for you. So I think that's a significant different value system.
You chose a career path in politics, but was this your first career choice?
I didn't choose in politics, I stumbled into it.
How so?
Well, I've always been interested in politics, but I've been I've always been a member of the PNP as a very young group secretary, very young. I was a constituency secretary at 21, but I never intended to run, and made that very clear. And Michael Manley sought to get me to run even going before that. O.D. Ramtali and a group of persons tried to get me to run in the 70s, and my mother had none of that, so I went abroad to do graduate work. And when I came back, Michael Manley tried to get me to run in 1989 and to become Minister of Finance, and I said no. P.J. Patterson tried to get me to run in 93 in the February election, and I said no. And we settled for a compromise that I would be a senator and a minister without portfolio.
Okay.
I only went into elective politics because Hugh Small resigned suddenly, and the government was faced with a crisis. There was no Minister of Finance, and the PGA felt that I was the best equipped. So they had to find a seat for me, since the Minister of Finance has to be elected. So I came into it unwillingly, but I into a challenging constituency.
Challenging.
But I like it.
Okay.
I found that is the aspect of politics which not the violence, etc., but the possibility of actually doing some substantive things. That's what I like most. And you know, there was always the debate, given the burden of being Minister of Finance, should we change the Constitution? Because the Constitution now requires the Minister of Finance to be an MP. But I'm opposed to it. The Minister of Finance must understand the realities from being a member of Parliament.
Although you said that you entered it unwillingly, did you ever imagine that you would be chosen as the Minister of Finance?
No, well, let me put it this way. Because of the work I'd done with the PNP in the period in opposition in the 80s, it seems, because I was never aspiring to it, it seems that there are persons who saw me in that light. Certainly Michael did, and certainly PJ did. So I would be lying if I said I wasn't aware of that.
Oh, okay.
But I couldn't, there are aspects of politics which then and still now which I don't like. Parts of it in terms of promising things which you can't deliver. And but I can't do it. And you shouldn't, because it comes back to haunt you. But some of these things I believe, and certainly it just seemed easier for me not to do that. But then I've chosen a different way. Many persons thought that I would have been swallowed up in South St. Andrew, but I have not. I have not, and in fact, if I hope to have made an impact on politics, it is a sense that you can impose your standards regardless of the constituency. So I refuse to. I'm not dealing with donmanship. I'm not dealing with, you know, I have broad constituencies which were communities which were literally at war, like Riemann Jungle. You're too young to know, but lots of music speak about, lots of old Jamaican songs speak about the war between Riemann Jungle. That's no longer so, because I refuse to accept that poor people should be divided by, you know, these silly boundaries. So I think that if I have brought anything to politics, is to demonstrate that you can respect persons' viewpoints and let them live together still. So although there's still violence, it has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with socialization, how you resolve problems, etc. That I'm working on.
Okay. Your undergraduate years and graduate years, were they spent pursuing finance?
No, well, what we call regional economics. I did math and economics and geography, and then I did regional economics, which is to look at how the economy is influenced by variations over space. But then I spent years in the Planning Institute, which exposed me to the international financial institutions, etc. So by the time I came to the ministry, the truth is that I'd had all the grounding necessary in terms of dealing with international institutions, etc.
Now, Dr. Davis, take us through your tenure as Minister of Finance. How difficult was that for you?
Well, in terms of the technical aspects of the issues and dealing with the different institutions, that was not difficult, because I'd been Director General of the Planning Institute, which would have given me that exposure. In several instances where the minister was the government's representative, I was the alternate. So that exposure. The problem is, regardless of how well you are prepared, the crises which come up, you just have to deal with them when they come up. And so the first crisis which I had to deal with was related to inflation. The country had just been racked by year after year of very high levels of inflation. And so I set that as my priority. And not only set it as a priority, but set it such that if the government said we are going to tackle inflation, that there was credibility. Because so many things come with that. Wage negotiations or moderation of wage demands, in terms of stability in the foreign exchange market. And then we had the financial sector crisis, which, you know, there are many persons trying to rewrite history, but the problem is that many of the institutions took short-term money and went into long-term projects. In other words, they were offering impossibly high interest rates in order to go into real estate. Now, real estate values only climb in inflationary times. But if you bring inflation down, then you have a situation where you have huge liabilities based on high interest rates, but the value of the assets won't be growing as quickly. So that was another problem. That was a major difficulty, not only to stop the whole system from collapsing into social chaos, but also to seek to keep developmental projects going, even whilst dealing with that problem. So that represented another major crisis. It's still, the effects are still with us because you had to use debt to solve that. But what certainly we were able to do is to inculcate into the technical people a sense of confidence. They know I trusted them, and even when, you know, errors were made, whilst I would reprimand them privately, publicly I stood with my team, and that's built their confidence. And I recall once when I said that we had a disagreement with the IMF, and someone said, "But how can you have that disagreement?" I said, "They have their team and I have mine, but I have greater confidence in mine." So I think that we, in terms of institution building, we have some of the best institutions in finance and planning in any country. I don't mean developing country. So if you take the Bank of Jamaica or the Planning Institute or the Statistical Institute or the FSC, I think that's a major contribution. And I don't want to introduce any doubts, but I would, as opposition spokesman on finance, if ever there were any attempt made to weaken those institutions, I would be taking a very strong position.
Now, what are some of the memorable moments you've had as Minister of Finance?
Some may seem unexciting. Bringing inflation down to single digits and retaining there, that in itself was a major achievement because it had been done since, it hadn't been done for like 20 years, but beyond that, it hadn't been done without price controls, etc. Signing the first MOU, that perhaps I would think has been my most exciting moment, because in November 2003, the first one, when I looked at the inflation was high, when I looked at the fiscal numbers, I realized that we couldn't afford anything, and I did the impossible. I called in Dwight Nelson, who is now minister, and is my friend and my colleague, and I said, "Dwight, this is the situation." And he said, "You have to present it to the unions." Presented it to the unions, and I gave them an option. Either they got the increase they wanted, and we slashed the workforce, or we froze the salaries, and no major redundancy. And counter to everybody's expectation, we worked through Christmas and signed the agreement in January. I think that has laid the basis for, and I hope that there's an MOU 3, but it has also laid the basis for a bigger social partnership. Okay. That would have been one of my priority tasks if the PNP had won.
Okay. Now, has your role as Minister of Finance aided your holistic development?
Yes. Yes, in the sense of being exposed to all aspects of government. Because being Minister of Finance and being a person who, I wouldn't say having veto power, but whose voice would be influential, I had to have a clear sense of all aspects of the country's development, and therefore it must have aided mine. Unfortunately, in many instances, I had to say no to my colleagues. Because each sector minister wants to do the best for his sector, but it all has to fit together. But I would think that being Minister of Finance and being Member of Parliament for South St. Andrew, that has exposed me to aspects of Jamaican life I wouldn't have known had I remained an academician or just a technician.
The issue of alternative investment schemes has become a topical issue lately. Now, what are your views concerning alternative investment schemes?
Well, two views. One is that as long as you're involved in taking money from members of the public, either to invest or as a deposit, you must register with the regulatory agencies and be supervised by them. That's non-negotiable. Why? You must be able to say, what are you doing with those resources? I mean, and I'm not necessarily speaking about necessarily fraudulent activities, but certainly you want to make certain that judicious decisions are being taken. And the regulatory authorities must be able to say, yes, we can account for the amount of money which has been taken in by this institution, and this is what they're doing with it. You can't have an institution taking hundreds of millions or billions of dollars of people's money, and it's a big smoke and mirrors as to what's happening with the money. So that you must be registered. At the same time, the state, neither the state nor any of the institutions can stop people taking risks with their money. So if someone is willing to take higher risks for the possibility of higher returns, there's nothing wrong with that. So therefore you'll have to have a system which allows for higher returns on higher risk. So you have to ride those two horses, and the position of the previous administration is clear. We aren't trying to tell you that you can't invest in high risk ventures, but we are. If you're taking money from the public, we have to know what you're doing with it. We won't tell you not to, but we have to know what you're doing it, and perhaps most important, we have to ensure that those who offer themselves to manage those resources are fit and proper. And what does that mean? You can't certify people to manage people's resources if they have questionable backgrounds.
Now, what are your views concerning the actions taken by the Financial Services Commission against the alternative investment schemes who allegedly breached sections of the Security Act?
I support them.
You support them?
Yeah, I support them. I set up the FSC. It's been staffed by very, very competent officials, and I think if all political persons had given them unambiguous support all along, I wouldn't say that we wouldn't have been faced with a challenge, but it would have made their job easier.
Now, would you have taken a different approach if you were still the Minister of Finance?
Well, as I said, the different one part of the different approach is that they would know clearly where I stood.
Okay.
But I'm not in favor of you violating anybody's human rights, but I'm in favor of the institution administering the regulations according to the law, and that is clearly known, and that is clearly known. I have deliberately taken the decision not to blow this up as in a political sense, because there's no, I mean, that's only short-term political gain, but I think there are clear lessons that members of the political directorate must learn not to bow to opportunism in the situation. There are certain principled positions which must dominate, and so that's I back the regulatory authorities, whether it's the Bank of Jamaica or the FSC.
We spoke earlier about your memorable moments as finance minister, but were there any disappointments?
Yes, yes. There's at least one speech I shouldn't have made, and there are a couple other things which were disappointing. But I view life as a set of challenges, and I never second guess myself in the context that the best you can ask of yourself or of anybody is, before you take any decision, you analyze it, You go through all the pros and cons. But many persons who comment and are experts never have to take the decision, so they can always be right. When you are faced with, on Monday morning, that you have to go to cabinet with a recommendation, then you have to take that decision. So I don't worry too much about the criticism per se. As I said, there are a couple of instances where, on reflection, I probably should have just kept my mouth shut.
Now we're just going to take a look at Dr. Davis' involvement with sports, being the chairman of Arnett Gardens Football Club. Now, Dr. Davis, what sparked your interest in football?
Well, truth is, I have an overall interest in all sports. I follow all sports. Generally, I'm half asleep because I was watching Federer beat Blake this morning and in the Australian Open. Okay. So I follow all sports, but South St. Andrew has a big history in both sports and culture, particularly music. And so I inherited the Arnett Gardens Football Club. We have done some things. We have, I would think, the best community stadium of a football facility in the country. I've been able to do this. This is not government money. Lots of people thought that because I was Minister of Finance, that came from government. Persons have come in and worked with me. The Tankwell Group, Chris Bicknell in particular. And so we have been able to build on the tradition there. But I've always felt that you can do a lot to enhance the self-confidence of persons if you lift the facilities and then their behavior can go with the facilities. And so at the Tony Spallings complex, if you get a chance to film it, it's not just the football, but the basketball, netball. These courts are of the highest standards. I would think next to the National Stadium, they're the best facilities in the country.
Although you are the MP for South St. Andrew, what is it that motivated you to take an active role in the club?
In the sports in Jamaica, but in my constituency, for a lot of young people, particularly young men, if you think of it, a sporting activity represents perhaps the only area of discipline which they'll be exposed to. You don't use your hands in football unless you're a goalkeeper. When it goes outside, it's outside. You don't bad tackle someone, there's a penalty. And so sports can be used as a way of saying these are societal rules. And if you look at what Captain Burrell did in terms of this first round as a Premier League coach for the Premier League, what he imposed seemed to have been very difficult for the clubs. But if you film a Premier League match at about 3 minutes to 3, or whatever the time is, people come on the field, there's a national anthem, the players know that you don't turn up at 3:30 for a 3 o'clock match. So officials, etc. And I believe that if we use sports, organized sports, and I don't make any concessions about discipline. No player comes to me to complain about disciplinary action. Even if I think that the action has been harsh, I'll whisper it to the people. But no player must feel that they can come to me to get an ease up. So I believe that we can use sports in that regard. Now there are other aspects, and it's something which I'm going to start with Arnett, that your players, we must recognize that sports on your active playing days are limited. And we should seek to ensure that every one of these players has another life, some other skill, etc. Okay. I think we have failed in that regard, and I want to start doing something about that with Arnett.
What steps?
I have two major educational programs. You have mentioned sports, but the development aspects of my life as an MP those are what excite me, and I place a great emphasis on education, both in the schools themselves, and for those who missed out, I have another one called ACE, Adult Continuing Education, and I want to get all my footballers enrolled in ACE to take themselves to some certification. Not necessarily academic per se, but if you get grade 9, you can get into heart. And not many of them think of their lives beyond football.
Okay, so vocational training.
Yeah, but much more. You know, you think of what a skilled carpenter or a skilled mason or a skilled plumber makes.
Yeah.
Certified.
Certified.
And then if you're certified, you're marketable worldwide, right? But it's very hard for a young man with girls cheering and all that and scoring goals for him to think beyond that. But one bad tackle, that's the end of that career. And so I've been trying to expose them to options.
The Minister of Finance is undoubtedly a challenging field. Is there a love for sports a means through which you got time to relax? Sorry.
Well, it's the sports. I mean, I personally work out. I used to jog 3.5 miles. My back hurts, so but I'm not. But I do yoga, etc. So what I believe about sports in theory, I apply it personally. That's why I've been able to maintain that sort of kill-dead schedule. So it's not something I just ascribe to and subscribe to in theory. I actually believe it myself. But I also I read a lot, and I'm an avid music collector. I collect a lot of music.
Inspirational music, classical music?
No, a lot of folk, a lot of reggae. Cultural reggae. I have an extensive collection of the Wailers, Bob, Peter, Bunny, everybody, all the great culture, Burning Spear, whatever. I collect, but I also collect a lot of, and I'm collecting increasingly some like jazz instrumentals and so on. But I spend a lot of time collecting music.
Describe your role as chairman of Arnett Gardens Football Club.
Well, it has changed since over the last year. I'm now a much more hands-on chairman. Probably too much so. I mean, like last night I was arranging meals for the trip to Montego Bay. You know. Okay. Initially, I just intended to be a titular chairman, but over the last year, I'm involved in trying to raise funds. We had a period of violence, and several of our sponsors dropped out. So each month then I'm trying to hustling to make the pay bill. You know, you're dealing with, to run a Premier League football club, you're looking at $25, $30 million a year, 2.5 average per month. That's what you're looking at. But given one of the problems about inner city communities, which people don't recognize, it's not just the shortage of money, it's the shortage of skilled personnel. So where in other areas, if I were in Mona, you could find accountants and whatever to help you. I am everything. I write letters, I call up people, I talk to the caterer, I get some footballs. Right now I'm planning a community-wide corner league because I want to look at some new talent. And so I'm in the middle of all of that. So there's no job description. There's nothing. If the lawnmower breaks down, they call me. Right? And if my daughter went and did some photographs, and I just realized I have to go and fix some toilets. So you name it, and I'm in the middle. The only thing I don't interfere with coaching decisions or team selections. I don't believe in that. Because if you undermine the authority of the coach, that's the end of his ability to be decisive.
I know you spoke earlier about the different programs you want to put in place for Arnett Gardens, aside from them being footballers. But how has your role as their chairman influenced their lives?
I hope that I'm not talking about any other area, I'm just talking about Arnett, but I think it's instructive for you to see that, for example, there are positions I take with regard to relationship to the security forces, etc. I won't support any community or any group in contention or in conflict with the security forces. This is not condoning any abuse. I'll take up abuse. But we need to get away from the notion that inner city areas are lawless people. And and they know my position, and this is a position I take, I've always taken, that the security forces are our friends. So in that regard, it's not just for the Arnett football team, it's just generally that order. When I first went to South St. Andrew, and the first meeting I held, this was chaos. You're in a meet room and everybody's lighting a cigarette and talking to each other and answering phone and lighting up a spliff. And I said, listen, for everyone who wishes to do those things, let us make a deal. Either you stay inside and I'll have the meeting outside, or I stay inside and you go outside. But we don't have to have a conflict. And if you come to a meeting in the community now, we have imposed order. You raise your hand and you want to speak, nobody else speaks. So I have tried to inculcate that. I've also tried to say to them that what is not, where you are now and where you're coming from is not what's important, where you're aiming at. And we have had some amazing successes in that regard. My only regret to date, and it's something I'm going to work on, I don't have the answer, the young men respond much less than the young women. My greatest successes have been in terms of young women who have moved up. Okay. It's obviously not my problem alone, but if you ask me, that's the one area I know that it remains a challenge. I don't know what's the key to turn on that engine.
Probably family, lack of family.
Girls come from the same family too. I think probably it's male role models. The role model for the young men are the ones you'd want to recommend. And so that to me remains the major challenge.
But has your role as chairman strengthened your ties as MP?
I don't think so. I don't think it, I mean, it hasn't weakened it, but I don't think it, my role, you see, I didn't plan the present role that I play as chairman. I didn't plan it to be this way. I thought I was just going to be like, should I say, the Governor General. But now I'm a Minister of Works and everything. I mean, tomorrow I'm going there to meet with the ancillary staff. So that role is not one I had planned. I just seen it as I would seek to get funds, etc. But one of the things leaving it alone is not an option for me. You know, lots of times, even my wife says to me, this is going to kill you. But you can't stop, because it means, if you think of it, what good news comes out from like constituencies like South St. Andrew or so on. If the football team wins or the netball team wins, or the MP says something useful. Because the media agencies tend to just highlight who was killed or whatever. So I can't ease up. So I'm not doing this to help my position as MP, but rather because I think it's a possible developmental tool.
But although they've been in the spotlight for crime, although they've had a lot of media reports on crime, do you see your presence as their football chairman doing anything to change that?
A lot of the crime, etc., results from instinctive reactions, resorting to type. Ego, especially for the men, it's very, very difficult for you to back off from a challenge, either real or perceived. So you feel you have to respond in kind. And I can't tell you I've been successful in trying to preach to them and say, walk it out. That's an expression I used to use. I don't know if you are acquainted with it. Just walk out an argument. Just, all right, you want to win the argument, you win. That's very hard for youngsters, and I've been trying to preach that. And sometimes you think you have made the breakthrough, and they say, yes, 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 they still call me minister. Yes, minister. But no, boy, I go. And he proceeds to return to where he was. So what I'm using whatever status that brings, but being chairman itself, I don't think has brought that much difference. I think it's mainly just what I bring to it as the person I am rather than as chairman.
How difficult is it to be the chairman for the football club?
It's not, no, they want it.
They want
it, because you have Mr. Siaga as chairman of Tivoli, so they want a ranking, right? And by the way, what the football has done, like the conflicts between Tivoli and, you know, when I started, we used to play our matches at Upper Camp. And, you know, I approached Mr. Siaga, I invited him to be my guest at the opening of the stadium. And, you know, I am there, he comes up there, it doesn't make any news.
So it opened up
It's open up, yeah. I probably am more at ease in Tivoli than a lot of JLP MPs, because they know me. And then,
so would you encourage other politicians to take part in sports?
Yes, everyone should. It's hard, eh? It's hard because the moment you become involved, then their failure is your failure. So there are persons who stay on their thing, and if they reach a final, they turn up, and then they disappear until that time. But and just like any other constituent, I mean, if you go there 7 times out of 8, the time you're missing, they say, "Boy, we don't see you." So it's hard. It's just another demand on your time. And then the other thing is that you can't simply just go to the football match. Somebody's going to get a chance to ask you about a range of other things.
Yes.
Yeah. But you see, I like it. I like it because I'm a sports fan, and I like it because I know what the positives are.
What are your views on Jamaica's football team at present?
Well, we are at one of the reasons I'm involved in, and I've been supportive of Mr. Siaga with the Premier League Clubs Association, is that unless we concentrate on building some youngsters through the Premier League system, you can't build a football program on people playing all over in England or wherever. I'm not trying to exclude them, but you have to raise the base and the quality overall, and the only way you can do it is through the organized system. So I think that Rene Simio is this time, although he's focusing on back to Africa, a major part of his task must be to be looking at the overall program and the youth program. The truth is that I don't know what we're going to do for 2010, but really we should be looking at our under-13s and our under-15s for 2014. Right? That's what you should be. You should be looking at that. If you look at some of the stars, there's Ronaldo. The Portuguese Ronaldo is 22, 23. I saw him a few years ago, and he was 19. You know, he was playing for Manchester United at 19. So Rooney is about the same age. The new Brazilian who is super player, Pato, is 19. So we now need to be looking at our under-13s, etc., and how you can mold them towards being the team. Whilst I understand the reason for pulling people, whoever they are, from all over, the base needs improvement. Lots of people playing Premier League shouldn't be playing the first when they don't have the control, etc. And we should be looking at some youngsters coming up with the right socialization and the right technical skills. So that's what I think we need to look at.
I'm happy you mentioned Rene Simons, because I would like for you to share with me your views concerning his return to Jamaica.
Well, Rene knows the country, and I know him very well. He was successful in taking us in 1998. But the things I've indicated in terms of, I don't believe that perhaps through the fact that he had a tight time frame, he didn't get a chance to spend the time on building the base. And that's why I would like him to be focusing some more efforts on the base.
Okay. Now, Dr. Davis, how difficult is it to balance sports, politics, and of course your family?
Well, it's easier now than it used to be. I'm no less busy, but there's no national issue waiting for my decision. I'm doing lots of additional things. I'm putting more time in the football. I'm doing a couple consultancies. I have an affiliation with the university, but the truth is that I led a very unusual life. Before, I literally worked 24/7 for 51 days, 51 weeks of the year, and then I would crash on Christmas Eve and sleep until New Year's Eve. That's what I did for 14 years. But now I'm, you know, I can take my wife to dinner or do something else, do some other things. But I would think I'm equally busy, but I'm doing things I have selected to do rather than responding to crises.
Although we're on the topic of sports, I just want you to just come in and tell us, what are your visions for Jamaica as a society?
My vision is, first, my major aspect of my vision is aimed at giving every youngster an opportunity to achieve his or her ultimate, not constrained by his family's wealth or lack of it thereof. My vision is a society in which we learn to resolve issues by talking them through. My vision is for a more disciplined society where, whether it be traffic rules or whatever, you know, we have seatbelt rules, we have rules about helmets, and then everybody gaily goes about it, and there's no reprimand or any penalty. And my vision is for a society in which parents, in particular fathers, take full responsibility for their offspring. So they're not very complicated. The higher income, etc., will come. But more important is a society with greater cohesion. And I think education and training will play a critical role in that. And I don't mean education and training in terms of CXC passes, etc. Just education to be a citizen of Jamaica.
You've spent a lot of time, or you have a lot of educational background. What would be your advice to youngsters concerning the importance of acquiring a good education?
Well, it has certainly made the difference to me, given my background. People look at me now, and people think that I've always been at this stage of my life. So it gives you self-confidence, it gives you the capability. I live in Jamaica by choice, but I could live and work anywhere in the world, but I live here by choice. It gives you that self-confidence. But more important though, I see education in a broader sense of civilizing a society. It is not by chance that many of the conflicts which lead to violent solutions take place among persons who are of lower educational background, etc. They have very little to live for, and hence they place very little value on life. And so your educational system must also play a role in socializing our people, civilizing our people. And so, you know, there are things which I see debates about, and I remember once explaining to some young people that I won't listen to any music which either denigrates women or elevates gun. And that's a straightforward principle. And I don't accept the notion that it's poor people expressing themselves, because I think that is, in a sense, a condescension. I believe that all of us have a role to play in the society, and we have different aspirations, we have different goals, but we can live with each other. And I don't think that you will achieve that unless there's just a general lifting of the educational status of the country.
What are your visions for the Arnett Gardens football team?
Well, first, I'm taking it step by step, taking us out of the relegation zone, and I think we have the capability to move in the third round up into the top four. That's where I want to go. And then my vision is that with bringing in some new players to win the championship. I don't think that's possible this year, but certainly next year.
So that's where we leave you on another edition of Spotlight. I'm your host, Tanika Douglas. Sure do hope you enjoy the program.